Hi, I'm Hannah Fraser from the University of Melbourne. In 2011, I started studying woodland birds in the Quantitative and Applied Ecology group. And I've learnt a lot about woodland birds since then, but I've also learned a lot about the scientific practice of ecology. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I learnt what I've learnt and see if you're interested in it as well. So you might be wondering why you'd study woodland birds at all. Basically, we think they're declining, and we think they have declined since European settlement. Since then, the majority of woodland habitat has been destroyed, and what's left is badly degraded and in small patches. In Queensland, the threat is severe and ongoing, with almost 1 million hectares cleared since 2012. In the southern states, there's almost no habitat at all left. The remnants are basically just in roadside strips, along rivers, and in some isolated reserves. This makes a fairly strong argument for why they would be declining. But if you look closely at any of these studies, you can see that the evidence in the literature is not at all consistent. Some studies look for a decline in woodland birds and find one, but others do look for the same decline and don't find any compelling evidence of a decline at all. Similarly, a lot of studies look at whether woodland birds are impacted by the amount of habitat or whether it's fragmented, but none of these studies are finding consistent results as well. And what I wanted to know was why. So I had a little bit more of a close look at these studies to see what possible differences could be driving this uncertainty about their decline and their response to habitat. And I found that actually all of the studies were talking about different sets of species. And I wondered whether this could be the reason why we're not sure about whether they're declining and how they're responding to their habitat. So I went through each of these studies with a fine-tooth comb and extracted their lists of woodland birds. And here is a frequency distribution of my results. The x-axis is broken up into bins for the percentage of studies that class each species as a woodland bird. And on the y-axis, you've got the number of species that fall into each of these bins. If we were completely consistent about how we classified woodland birds, you'd just see two columns on this graph. One on the far left at 0, representing birds that everybody regards as a non-woodland bird, and one column on the right at 100, where everybody studying that bird considers it a woodland bird. But as you can see, the vast majority of species fall somewhere in the middle. And this is a level of inconsistency that I was surprised to find, but I also think could be completely responsible for differences in how we perceive woodland bird declines and habitat preferences. This massive amount of inconsistency really got me thinking. Are woodland bird experts the only ones that are really bad at classifying things? Or is that actually a broader problem for ecology? And if so, why am I not hearing more about it? Why isn't it something that we think about and we consider when we're doing ecological studies? So I trolled through the literature to see if I could find other people who'd had these problems before. And I came up with a bunch of hits. So there's lots of terms in ecology that people have struggled with over the years. Things like environment, habitat, and invasive species are often complained about, and a lot of ecologists are concerned that we're not using the terms consistently. But there's not a lot being done about it. And I think part of that is because the majority of ecologists just aren't aware, as I wasn't, that this could possibly be a problem. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of a demonstration of how this kind of differences in terminology, how they look in a practical sense. So I've asked some of the fantastic female researchers that I've worked with to give you a little snippet about what they think an invasive species is, and we'll be able to see whether they think of different things when they consider an invasive species.
An invasive species is a species that's occurring outside its natural range, and it's outcompeting the other species in its new location.
I think of an invasive species as one that's established and spread beyond its original range.
I think an invasive species is any species that is both invading and causing damage to something that humans value, such as the natural environment.
So I thought that was really interesting. There was a few consistent themes. Everybody thought that the invasive species had to be outside its natural range, but for Cindy and Libby it had to have extra effects as well. So Cindy thought that it had to be outcompeting the native concerned about it having an impact on things that humans care about. And these kind of differences among people with very similar backgrounds are indicative of the kind of inconsistency there is in the field of ecology around these really key ecological terms. About a year after I started my work on woodland birds and found this problem, Salvador Herrando Perez brought out this article about the need for a convention on ecological nomenclature. And I thought it was mind-blowing, but it raised a number of concerns among people, and there was a bit of resistance to it. These main concerns were that prescribing how you use terms could actually make it harder to research certain fields. And also there's not really very much proof that it's important. So people think that it's confusing the way we do science, but nobody's actually tested this. And if it's not important, why should we change the way we do things? So what I wanted to look at with the woodland birds was whether the way we classify species is actually impacting the way we think they're responding to things. And I specifically wanted to look at whether it was affecting how we saw whether they were declining. So I used the same data and same methods to have a look at how classifying species differently would affect how we understand their decline. And I took 5 published classifications from the literature to work this out. And you can see that depending on which one you use, you have a different idea about how much and how fast woodland birds are declining. If you're looking at studies 2 or 3, you actually see that they may be increasing through time, whereas the others variously show different levels of decline. And this is sort of the first real empirical evidence that classifying ecological terms differently actually has an impact on our ecological inference. And it says a lot about how consistent and generalizable results of studies are if you can see such massive differences, just depending on how you classify species, even keeping the methods and the data the same. And I think this is a really strong argument that Herrando was onto something when he was talking about coming up with a convention of nomenclature for ecology. But in order for this to happen, there's going to be a lot more proof that it's important, because it's going to be a massive pain for a whole lot of people. And I think that my bird research is taking us a little way along this track. Unfortunately, it's beyond my abilities at this time to resolve this for all of ecology, but I could get a little bit closer on the woodland bird issue. So I gathered as many woodland bird researchers as were willing and interested together, and together we came up with a classification of woodland birds to go on with, and specifically for the purposes of listing woodland birds under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act as a threatened ecological community. If this is successful, the woodland bird community will be protected in perpetuity, and the ongoing clearing in Queensland is going to be hindered or hopefully even stopped. We managed to come up with this classification together, and there was a lot of buy-in from all of the woodland bird experts. And we recently actually applied for the PBC listing, and it's proceeded to the next stage. So I'm very hopeful that we'll see a protected ecological community for woodland birds in the very short-term future. And I think this is a massive advantage, particularly when it comes to enhancing the consistency of how we're classifying woodland birds, because it provides a concrete reason to use this specific list. Grant applications and journals will be much more interested in the research studying this specific group of woodland birds because it's got enhanced conservation significance. And I think this kind of incentive can really make a difference in how well people adopt these new consistent classifications of specific terms. Obviously, there's a long way to go until we have complete consistency about how we use these key important terms in ecology. But I think that this is a really important step along the way. And by demonstrating that it's possible through the example of woodland birds, I hope that my research will encourage people to tackle this question in other terms. And I hope that I have the opportunity to tackle these questions further as well.